All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're focusing on something pretty specific. For those of you out there in the Corps, this one's for you.
Ooh, diving into some Marine Corps doctrine.
You got it. We're going deep on MCDP 10. That's the Marine Corps doctrinal publication, right? The one that lays out, well, how Marines fight, how they operate, the whole thing.
Yeah, you could say it's the foundation, the playbook, not just what you do, but the how and the why, you know, the Marine Corps way of thinking about war fighting.
And full disclosure, we're civilians here, not Marines ourselves, but we've been digging into this document. And we're going to break down specifically Appendix A, the principles of joint operations. Think of them like the guiding stars for any operation, big or small. What do you think?
Makes sense, yeah. And what's interesting about these, they're not like rigid rules. MCDP 10 really emphasizes these principles are tools. And just like any tool, you got to apply them with skill, judgment, depending on what the situation calls for.
So it's not just memorizing a list like, okay, got to do mass, got to do objective. It's more about the spirit of it, right?
Right.
Almost like, if you're learning martial arts, it's not just the moves, it's the whole philosophy behind it.
Yeah, I like that. It's that adaptability that's key. Because on the battlefield, things change fast. Rote memorization, it's not going to cut it. You need that deeper understanding to make decisions in the heat of the moment. And that's where a Marine's own experience comes in.
Definitely. So let's get into it, starting with, let's see, mass as the S. Now, on the surface, it seems straightforward enough, concentrating your forces where they'll have the biggest impact. But how does that translate to the real world, for a Marine on the ground?
Well, imagine this. You're leading a squad pinned down by enemy fire. Mass, in this case, could mean focusing all your firepower, every rifle, every weapon, on one specific enemy position. Why? To suppress their fire, give your team a chance to move, to maneuver.
Okay, makes sense. So it's about overwhelming force at a critical point.
Yeah.
But I got to ask, in modern warfare, is it still just about sheer numbers?
Yeah.
Just throwing more bodies at a problem?
And not so much anymore. You hit the nail on the head. See, with precision weapons and the need to move fast, avoid becoming a target yourself, mass now means being able to concentrate your forces quickly, deliver that decisive blow, and then disperse just as fast. It's a lot more dynamic than it used to be.
Yeah, you can't just hunker down in one spot anymore. So for a Marine, that means constantly adapting, making those split-second decisions about where to focus firepower, when to move, all while under fire. Talk about pressure.
Absolutely. High-stakes decision-making, that's the reality of modern warfare. And that brings us to our next principle, I think, objective. Sounds basic, right? Every mission, gotta have a clear goal. But why is this so important when we zoom out, look at the bigger picture? Well, having a clear objective, it's not just about knowing where you're going. It's about ensuring that every single action you take, every risk, every shot fired, it all contributes to reaching that goal.
So even if I'm just a rifleman, knowing the overall objective helps me see how my role fits into the big picture. It's not just following orders blindly, it's understanding the why.
Exactly. Without a clear objective, you risk what we call mission creep, wasting resources, and ultimately failing to achieve the real strategic goal. It's like if you're navigating with a compass but you don't know where you're headed, you're just going to end up lost.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk offensive. This one seems pretty ingrained in the Marine Corps DNA. You guys are known for taking the fight to the enemy. But how does that apply when, say, you're in a defensive situation? You're dug in waiting for the enemy to come to you.
Well, even in defensive scenarios, right, the principle of offensive is still there. It's about always looking for opportunities to seize the initiative. It's not just about holding your ground. It's about finding ways to disrupt the enemy's plans, keeping them off balance, dictating how the engagement unfolds.
So even when you're on the defensive, you're not just passively waiting. It's more like constantly looking for that opening, that chance to strike back and take control. You're always thinking offensively.
Precisely. And this mindset is really where that Marine Corps ethos of aggressive action shines through. It's about turning the tables even when the odds seem stacked against you.
Okay, makes sense. So moving on to security. I imagine this one's pretty high on the list for, well, anyone in a combat zone.
You bet. But it's not always simple, right? It's about finding that balance, the need for security with the need to take risks to actually achieve the mission. Seems like those two could clash sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. So how do you reconcile that? How do you balance being safe, protecting your forces, with the need to actually get out there and do what needs to be done?
You're right, it's a balancing act. MCDP 10, it emphasizes that security is essential, but it shouldn't paralyze you. Sometimes the best way to protect your forces is by taking that bold action, going on the offensive.
So taking calculated risks can actually make you safer in the long run.
Exactly. By disrupting the enemy's plans, seizing the initiative, you create a more secure environment for your own troops. And on top of that, what about technology? How's all the modern tech changed the way Marines think about security these days? Technology, it's a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, you've got advanced surveillance, intelligence capabilities. You can get a much clearer picture of the battlefield, anticipate threats better. But then again, those same technologies can be turned against you. The enemy can use them to track your movements, target you.
So it's like a constant cat and mouse game. You have to be smarter than ever, adapt your tactics to stay ahead. Can't rely on technology alone.
Definitely not. You still need those core principles, that understanding of the fundamentals to guide your decisions, especially when things get complicated.
All right, that makes sense. Let's talk about economy of force. It sounds like making the most of what you've got, which I imagine is super important when resources are limited in a combat zone.
You got it. This principle, it's about making tough choices. Allocating your resources, whether it's manpower, firepower, or even time, to where they'll have the biggest impact strategically. It's about prioritizing efforts, knowing you can't be strong everywhere at once. It's like, you're a chess player. You've got to be thinking several moves ahead. Where are my pieces? Where are theirs? What are the most important objectives? And sometimes you have to accept some risk in one area to achieve a greater advantage elsewhere.
Right, it's that classic military dilemma. You can't defend everything. You got to focus your efforts. But that's a tough call, right? Having
Yeah.
to decide where to concentrate your forces, where to maybe accept a little more vulnerability.
And that's where leadership comes in. That's where experience and judgment are critical. You got to be able to look at the big picture, understand the intent, and then make those tough choices about where to allocate your resources. And that applies at all levels, really.
So whether you're a squad leader figuring out how to deploy your fire team or a battalion commander, moving companies around the battlefield, economy of force is in play. It's about making those smart decisions
Yeah.
under pressure with limited resources. No easy feat.
Nope, not at all. All right, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk maneuver. Now, when I hear that word, I think, troops moving across the battlefield. But MCDP 10, it paints a broader picture.
Yeah, it's more than just like physically moving from point A to point B.
Exactly. For the Marine Corps, maneuver, it's not just physical, it's also psychological and technological. It's about positioning your forces, yeah, physically, but also mentally and even virtually, all to gain that advantage over the enemy.
Okay, so it's not just about where you are on the map, but how you got there
Yeah.
and the impact that movement has on the enemy, right? Like
Mhm.
messing with their heads, making them react in a way that benefits you.
You got it. Think about it like this. You use a feint, a deceptive maneuver, to draw enemy forces away from your real objective. You haven't even fired a shot yet, but you've already maneuvered to gain a tactical advantage. Or how about using electronic warfare? You jam their communications, disrupt their ability to coordinate. That's maneuver in the digital domain.
So you're basically outsmarting them, playing chess with their minds, even before the real fight begins. That's fascinating. And this idea of maneuver, it goes all the way down to the individual Marine, right? Like how you move in a firefight, using cover and concealment, taking advantage of the terrain. It's all maneuver.
Absolutely. It's about being aware, constantly assessing, anticipating the enemy's next move, and then using that to your advantage. It's a mindset as much as it is a physical action.
Okay, so let's talk unity of command. On the surface, it seems pretty clear. You need one person in charge, making sure everyone's working towards the same goal. But I imagine it gets tricky when you've got, say, joint operations, multiple branches of the military all working together.
You're right, it can get really complex. Trying to achieve unity of command in joint operations, multinational or interagency even, that's a big challenge. You've got all these different organizations, different cultures, different ways of doing things.
So how do you make sure everyone's on the same page?
Well, the key is clear lines of authority, communication. From the very beginning, everyone has to understand who's in charge, how decisions are made, and you got to build a culture of collaboration, making sure everyone understands the overall mission.
So it's not just having one general at the top calling all the shots. It's about making sure every single person, down to the most junior Marine, understands the mission, their role in it.
Exactly. It's that shared understanding that's crucial. And for leaders, it's about communicating clearly up and down the chain of command so everyone's pulling in the same direction.
So a well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
Everyone working together towards that common goal. And speaking of achieving goals, let's talk surprise. That seems like a real game changer on the battlefield.
No doubt. Surprise can completely disrupt the enemy's plans. It creates confusion, hesitation, gives you that window of opportunity to take the initiative, and it can even make up for being outnumbered. If you can catch the enemy off guard, that can tip the scales in your favor, even if they have more troops or firepower.
So it's not just about, being stealthy, sneaking up on them. It's about hitting them at a time or place or in a way they just don't expect.
Right. You want them to be caught flat-footed, unable to react effectively. And MCDP 10, it actually lays out a bunch of factors that contribute to achieving surprise.
Like what?
Well, speed, obviously.
Mm.
Deception is huge. Using tactics or technologies they don't expect, that can throw them off. And of course, a good intelligence. You got to know what the enemy's doing, where they are, what their weaknesses are, so you can exploit them.
It's like being one step ahead all the time. And I bet, thinking back to all the military history you've studied, there are tons of examples where surprise played a key role in winning a battle.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Think about Hannibal crossing the Alps, or the D-Day landings. History's full of examples where surprise led to some pretty decisive victories. For a Marine, understanding how to achieve that surprise and then how to capitalize on it, that's a critical skill. It can literally be the difference between winning and losing.
Okay, that makes sense. So moving on, we've got simplicity. Now, this one seems a bit counterintuitive. I mean, modern warfare is so complex, right? All these moving parts, all the tech involved. Why is keeping things simple so important?
Because when the bullets start flying, you need clarity. You need to be able to think clearly, make quick decisions, and if you have this overly complicated plan, it's just going to lead to breakdowns, people misinterpreting things, delays, and confusion. Simplicity, though, that makes everything run smoother, it helps with communication, and it allows you to adapt quickly when things inevitably change on the battlefield.
So it's not about dumbing things down, but more about streamlining things, making sure everyone understands their role and how it all fits together.
Right. Clear, concise orders. Straightforward communication. That's crucial, especially in the chaos of combat. And this applies at every level, from the fire team leader giving instructions to his Marines, all the way up to the general briefing his staff on the entire campaign plan.
And I bet this is even more important in those joint operations we were talking about, where you've got all these different groups, different procedures working together.
Absolutely. The simpler the plan, the less room there is for miscommunication, for things to go wrong. And in the end, a simple plan that everyone understands is way more effective than a brilliant plan that nobody can execute.
It makes you think about the importance of clear communication, no matter what you're doing, really. All right, let's move on to a principle that I think is super relevant, especially these days. Perseverance. Why is this quality so important for Marines, particularly in these long, drawn-out conflicts we see happening around the world?
Because modern warfare, it's rarely a quick victory. It's a long game. A lot of times, you're dealing with complex political situations, social dynamics.
Yeah.
And that takes sustained commitment, resilience. You got to be able to keep going, even when things are tough. When you face setbacks, that's perseverance.
It's about having that grit, that refusal to give up. It's part of what makes Marines, right?
For sure. And that kind of mindset, it comes from training, from shared hardship, from knowing you're part of something bigger than yourself. And that ties into another crucial principle, I think, legitimacy. In today's world where everything's connected, everything's on camera, it's more important than ever to operate within the rules, both legally and ethically. Yeah, it's not just about following the rule book. There's more to it.
So, what are we talking about here?
It's about earning trust, right?
Mhm.
The trust of the local population, the international community, even your own troops. You got to show that your actions are not only legal, but also just, aligned with how things should be done.
So it's bigger than just winning the fight. It's about winning, well, the peace too, right? Thinking about the long-term consequences.
Exactly. And that leads us right into our final principle, restraint. This one's all about using force carefully, minimizing collateral damage, and avoiding unnecessary escalation.
So basically thinking about the bigger picture. Every shot fired, every bomb dropped, it has ripple effects. It's not just about the immediate target.
And for a Marine on the ground in the heat of the moment facing a hostile enemy, that can be a tough call to make. But that's where all that training kicks in, the discipline, that understanding of these principles we've been talking about.
Right. Restraint, it's not about being weak or hesitating. It's about making smart decisions under pressure, knowing that sometimes the best move is to hold back.
Exactly. It's about understanding that force is a tool, and like any tool, it needs to be used wisely, responsibly. Sometimes the most courageous act is choosing not to use it.
Yeah. It's about being a warrior. Yeah. But also a peacekeeper, a protector, someone who understands the responsibility that comes with wearing the uniform, carrying a weapon.
And sometimes those decisions to hold back, to de-escalate, they can be just as important for mission success as any act of, bravery or daring on the battlefield. It shows professionalism, builds trust, and ultimately helps achieve a lasting peace.
We've covered a lot of ground today. From mass to restraint, it's clear that these principles of joint operations, they really do provide a framework for how Marines approach every aspect of warfare.
It's a way of thinking, a way of approaching challenges, not just in combat, but in any situation where leadership, strategy, and decision-making are required.
Yeah, they're more than just words on a page. It's about the Marine Corps ethos, their values. It's their guide for leadership, decision-making. It's a key to success, not just on the battlefield, but beyond.
Absolutely. And for you, listening out there, if you're in the Corps, remember this. Internalizing these principles, it's not just about checking a box or passing a test. It's about understanding the WHY behind the what.
It's about being able to apply these principles in real-world situations, the tough situations you face every day.
It's about becoming the kind of leader who can win battles, yeah, but also win hearts and minds. Someone who can navigate the complexities of modern warfare with honor and integrity.
And we hope this deep dive has given you a solid foundation in these principles, a starting point. It's up to you now. Take this knowledge, study it, debate it, and apply it to your own experiences as a Marine.
Because ultimately, these principles aren't just about winning wars. They're about building a better future. And that's a mission worthy of every Marine.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.